So, welcome to the newest episode of Sticky Note Conversations. I am your host, Erika Washington, and I am really excited, as I am always excited, to sit down and have a really deep discussion with a really smart person. And this particular really smart person, I've known for quite a few years. It's always funny because I never really know and remember when I meet people, but I know that Michael Lyle is a very smart and very handsome journalist here in Nevada. And he is also an award-winning journalist as well. And he currently writes for the Nevada Current, but I want to now introduce him to the rest of the audience so we can learn more about his trajectory in Nevada around journalism, but also, and just as important, where we're at, because I think today will be a really interesting conversation about what's going on in our current events. We have so much happening with the presidential election and all of the last minute changes over the past week. I feel like if you blinked, you might have missed something. And I think even by the time this episode airs, some of the things may sound old and passe just in the next few days. So we're going to do our best to really dig in and hopefully be able to explain a little bit about what's happening and what to expect next over the next couple of months. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Lyle. Welcome to Sticky Note Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk, and hearing the introduction, it made me think of a joke that I've been hearing and seeing on the internet of, so what episode of Scandal are we on now? Because it feels like these last few weeks.
That's exactly
like,
what it feels like. Exactly. And I'm like, is B613 really going to be a thing?
Yeah.
So, Michael, getting started, I want to ask you, you have a very extensive bio, but I want to know, who are you? When you walk into this world, like, how do you see yourself? How do you define yourself? Who's Michael Lyle?
Oh, that's such a good and hard question. It's funny because I've been thinking about this a lot too. I've been in my journalism career for, oh my gosh, 14 years. And it's so easy to default as like career as identity, but I'm so much more than that. And so I think one of my identity is just, I am a storyteller, but I'm a truth seeker. I think that's how I see myself. And that's how I gravitated towards journalism and towards the stories that I like to tell, because I am a truth seeker. And I know that there's a power in storytelling, into helping those that are the most vulnerable and also holding accountable the most powerful. And so when I'm navigating this life, I try to be a truth seeker and a seeker of knowledge, definitely because I'm an avid reader, love watching TV and being connected to the culture. And I think that ties with being a journalist, just a curious mind. So I think those attributes are who I am, just a truth seeker, a curious adventurer, just trying to figure out this world and use my voice and use what platforms I have to kind of make a difference.
And I am always excited when I see you post a new book on social media, because either I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that one, I need to check that out. So I appreciate you sharing on social media the books that you're reading, because I think we don't read enough.
No. Yeah. I've always been a reader. This year, I think I've upped my reading. And I think that's partially because I just finished grad school and doing grad school with full-time work. Just there was not a lot of reading opportunities. But I agree. There's so many amazing books and amazing storytellers, both in the fiction world and nonfiction world. And we're not reading enough. You can tell that sometimes in our discourse that's happening all around us.
Yeah. Oh, yes. There is a vast difference. And I haven't read enough fiction. Like, I've made it a purpose this year to pick up some fiction books and buy them. I haven't actually read them yet, but I have at least made the effort to buy some, because I had only been reading nonfiction for so long. But I think it's important to move our brains around, because I think in that same vein, and it might be one of the reasons why I ask people the question of who are you, is because there's not a lot of air between me and my work and my organization. Like, it's all one breath for me. And at the same time, I am more than just Make It Work Nevada. I am more than just an executive director, that sort of thing. But sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
I get that. Yeah.
And then the things that I read usually have something to do in some way. It connects a dot back to the work. So I'm trying to understand better as I'm into my mid 40s now. Who am I and what do I want to be in the next decade or whatever?
I feel like with the books, because a lot of the nonfiction is mostly like investigative journalists and like exploratory and narrative journalism. And so that's why I like to mix in some fiction, because it it helps me disconnect from just being a journalist and being outside of that and just trying to better myself as a journalist. But in one aspect, reading fiction does better me as a writer because you see it. But I think it makes me feel in different ways that nonfiction doesn't make me. And so it makes me a more well-rounded and a hopefully empathetic person that kind of have that mix up.
Yeah, and that's so funny that you said that, because one of the books I pulled that I was like, I wonder if Michael's read this book or not, that it is written by a journalist and it is nonfiction. It's called Invisible Child, Poverty and Survival and Hope in American City. I love this book so much, as you might be able to tell, that I carried around with me on planes and everything, because I also don't know why I refuse to buy paperbacks, and I have all these hardcover books, and then I'm trying to stuff them in bags and carry them on planes. But it's such a good book.
Books are heavy, by the way. I had a big travel month last June, and that's the book that I had, because this will sustain me for like a few weeks to read on planes and in the limited spare time that I had. But it's a fantastic book, and with the detail and rich history and complicated story about homelessness by following Dasani and just her journey. That was such a tremendous and powerful read. It was a hard read, but beautiful storytelling by Andrea Elliott.
I was like, oh, she deserves a Pulitzer for sure. And I was just like, oh, this lady can write. Like that. When I read it, I'm like, it had been a long time since I had read something that made me feel like I want to be a better writer, because I don't always get that when I'm reading something, but there are certain ones that I'm just like, oh, you've challenged me to step my game up in some way, because the way she's able to connect dots. And for listeners who have not read Invisible Child, in which I am highly, highly, highly recommending, this New York Times journalist follows a family around, a homeless family around in New York City. And she focuses her attention on one particular child in his family. Her name is Dasani, like the water bottle. And she kind of follows her all the way through. I want to say she's probably in middle school. I think she's in middle school when they start, or she might be a little bit younger than that. But then I found the book because of an article later on about Dasani in the New York Times. And I'm reading this article, and then they're like, oh, there's a book about it. But they talk about, she connects dots to why her family is homeless and they're living in this shelter, and how at one point, I think the shelter was actually a hospital where her grandmother was born in, or right across the street from it. It was very similar. And then they get into the past. They get into, I think, World War II.
Yes.
And how Dasani's grandfather, when he came from fighting the war, he was not able to engage with the GI Bill and the benefits that soldiers had available to them, that white soldiers had available to them. And it really just shows how structural racism and the structure of keeping resources away from certain communities has generational consequences to it. And it just goes on, and it just connects the dots in such a way that I feel like everyone should read it and understand. Because I think, to your point about homelessness, you can't just look at someone on the street and think they made a bad decision. And because they made one bad decision, now they're homeless, and there's not a bigger story or a deeper rooted issue going on.
Absolutely. There are so many policy decisions that have happened over decades, if not centuries, of American public policy that have shaped the lives of who is and isn't on the streets today. And I say isn't specifically for a reason, because a lot of the policies have been geared, all the policies mostly have been geared and shaped towards white Americans. And so seeing the differences in homeless data and seeing that Black and brown people are way more seen in that data is reflective of the policies that we've created. And so Andrea Elliott just did a great through line of showing and connecting that those policies and how it had specific impact of the racism and housing policy that our grandfather faced had direct impact on the homelessness that her and her family are now experiencing. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
such good journalism.
Oh, so good. So, speaking of good journalism, let's talk a little bit about your journey. How did you get to be an award-winning journalist? Was this something that you dreamed about as a kid? Did you grow up thinking, I'm going to be the investigative reporter or doing all the hard facts, all of the cliche, what you see in movies of what a journalist is?
Somewhat, yes. So, like, I remember even from middle school thinking about journalism and being a reporter, and I'd always loved writing, and my mom had always encouraged me to write poetry. The funny thing is I wasn't much of a reader in middle school and high school. It wasn't until like college, which sometimes I was a late bloomer in reading, but you know, it happened. But I did love writing in middle school and high school, and I always think about reporting. And but I was also doing acting and musical theater. And so there was actually a clear sliding door moment, if you will. I had to choose between going to my senior year musical theater class or being part of the yearbook class. And I chose the yearbook class. And so my path diverged. And it was through that class, and also was an editor of our literary magazine, you know, kind of nerdy. And it was through that I went through a journalism conference in my senior year of high school. And I was like, oh man, I think I'm going to go to college for journalism. I was born out in Las Vegas, but went to high school out in Tennessee. UNLV was one of the few colleges I applied for outside of Tennessee. And my mom really encouraged me to pursue life outside of Tennessee just because she knew I was too big for how small-minded it is. And so it encouraged me to go back to Las Vegas where my sister was still and I could live with her. And so I decided to pursue journalism, and then I decided not to pursue journalism. Then I decided to pursue that college journey of, let me try this major. But I always came crawling back to journalism, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, because at the same time, I also was really connected with my church groups and a lot of the social justice ministry that they were doing. And so I knew that passion, I think, predated even my thoughts towards journalism and leaning towards my passion towards writing, because I knew I wanted to make a difference in the world. I know it sounds so cliche and so trivial, but I really did. Like, I did want to make it passion, want to make a difference in the world, and didn't know how or where that would be, but whatever it was going to be, I was going to make a difference. And then somehow along the way in college, the dots connected saying, oh, journalism is how I can make a difference in the world. But then I graduated in 2008, and 2008 was not a great year. It was a great year for...
Come on, recession.
Yeah, it was the start of a recession. Journalism jobs were not hiring. And so I worked part-time in PR for a little while, which I did not enjoy, but it was a paycheck. Gotta make that money.
Yeah. Especially in this work. Did you always want to go into newspaper journalism versus like television broadcast? Did you want to dabble, or was it always just, I'm writing articles?
Yeah, I never thought about broadcast. I didn't think I would have had what it takes to do broadcast, just because at that point too, in college, I was definitely a lot shyer than what I am now. And I think I didn't think I was a great public speaker. I think that's something I'm still working on, but I'm a lot more confident than I was. And so broadcast was never even something that I thought about, which I'm probably glad, because I think that would have been way more expensive, because you have to get all your camera stuff and everything for broadcast. But I always thought about like magazine journalism, and it's like, oh, like Newsweek, long form, and stuff like that. And at one point I thought I was going to go to Africa and be an international journalist. So to answer your question, it was always writing at some point. And when I finished journalism school, I had applied for law school. And one of my journalism professors who I had gotten a letter of recommendation before told me, like, you should actually try to get a job with the Review Journal if you can. I think you have what it takes. But at that time, again, hiring was not happening. And so I decided not to go to law school. Went to do PR for a year and a half while things were shaking out. Went to Africa for a little bit to do some volunteer work there.
Where'd you
Came
go?
back, was laid off for my PR job. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And so during that time, I had applied for a bunch. The community section of the Review Journal had a job opening, and I ended up getting hired on there. And that was kind of my entryway in 2010 into the world of journalism, doing community news. And I think that had a good foundation to like do a lot of boots on the ground, local reporting and getting contacts with people. And I moved from there to do features writing at the Review Journal. But I've always wanted to do more social service reporting, homeless. Remember, I wanted to make a difference in the world. And so I wanted to do more than like some of the featurey things, some of the personality profiles. I wanted to do more nuanced reporting, but never had the opportunity. Always told, you don't have the background, you don't have this, you don't have that. There's a lot of the things that a lot of people of color in this industry, a lot of Black people in this industry, a lot of queer people in this industry, a lot of women in this industry always hear. We don't have what it takes to do what all these white dudes that we're hiring. And so after 7 years at the Review Journal, I did have some good opportunities and good editors. I shouldn't discredit them. I actually won my first awards at the Review Journal. I was the 2011 Journalist of Merit from the Nevada Press Association, which is the most prestigious honor for young journalists with less than 5 years of experience in the state. And so there were a lot of great opportunities, but I knew I wanted more, and I knew I had more to give. And so 2017, I took a leap and decided to freelance for a while, which was a hard choice because that freelancing is difficult.
I can tell you that's for sure. Getting paid by the word, like that was my life. I call it the feast or famine, feast or famine life. When you said you went to Africa, where'd you go?
Oh, I went to Cameroon, which ironically I cannot go back because they've passed some really strict anti-gay laws since then. I was not out at that moment, and still something that I was wrestling with at that moment. But yeah, I went to Cameroon. It was someone that I had connected with through like a social justice ministry that I had volunteered with out here. And they had a connection through this orphanage that was run in Cameroon. So I decided to go there over a summer to volunteer and just be immersed. I mean, there's always that. You've heard this too, of like what it's like to be Black and to go to Africa and feel like that connection. And so I've always wanted to do that. And so as part of that too, and it was it was an amazing time. And yeah.
How long were you there?
Like a month, so not that long, but long enough to like
to like immerse yourself a little bit to understand some of the culture. That sounds amazing. It does. I was thinking about the first article. I think the first article that was done on Make It Work Nevada was actually done by you. And I hadn't forgotten about the article, but I don't think I'd realized that was like our first like big piece of press. And you were still at the Review Journal when we held that event at the Writer's Block, and which was a really great event with Miss Ruby Duncan.
Yes.
Yeah. And we had our panel around Black women in politics. And so thank you for covering us and wanting to think about what life is like as a journalist. I think, like I said earlier, there are people who I think sort of believe that it looks like what you see in a movie or what have you, which, I mean, I guess sometimes it can, but a lot of times I feel as though people see journalists as either they're like the bad guy sometimes in movies because they're so dogged and they, not going to stop on this story, and they'll go to any lengths to, do X, Y, and Z, which I guess could also look adventurous, I guess. But also, on the other hand, it just looks like, you're sitting in a room with piles of paper around you and smoking a cigarette and being angsty and angry all the time. And so
I'm pretty angry. Although if I see one more journalism movie where like it's particularly the female journalist goes and sleeps with a source for information, I might actually throw my laptop because it's such a destructive, gross trope that never happens.
And it takes away from the whole ethics class that you have to take if you go into journalism. That I think, I don't remember it technically being covered, but I think it was somewhere in there that if you don't sleep with the source, because weird.
It was funny. I was rewatching a horror movie the other night. Love horror movies. I don't know. I was rewatching Urban Legend, which is from the 90s. It's such a ridiculous slasher, but I love ridiculous slashers. But one of the characters is a journalist. And at one point in the movie, they're breaking in a professor's office. And the person that he's with is not great for journalism ethics. And he goes, "Oh, I dropped that course. It wasn't doing well for my GPA." I was like, that is terrible. Like,
if you can't pass that, then maybe we need to rethink what you're doing.
But there are aspects of journalism and journalism movies that they get correct. And there are other aspects that I don't think people realize how many hours I spend emailing people. And even just like, and how much it actually takes to get an email together, especially with I'm emailing public records requests and making sure the words that I'm using are very specific, because a lot of times when I'm emailing for records, there are agencies that don't want to give me what I'm asking for. And so they'll find loopholes by like the words that I use. And if I'm not,
that's not exactly what you said. That's not what you requested.
Exactly. And so to draft a perfect records request or near perfect records request actually takes really a lot of precision. And oftentimes I'm being interrupted through that precision of like phone calls or other things going up, or like emails coming in, or news flashes. My gosh, these last few weeks, like all these news flashes, like, can someone leave me alone so I can write and not think about anything?
I can't do my work and report the news if you keep having more news.
I know. Just give me a break. But there's a lot of that. There is some like, I don't know how many movies show this, but like the door knocking. I remember Spotlight showed that a lot, which Spotlight obviously is a great movie and has some of the most accurate depictions of journalism. But there is some door knocking that I have different anxiety from that. I used to have anxiety because like just going up to random strangers, but now I have anxiety because like guns exist and people shoot through doors. And just people are crazy. But
and you're Black.
Yeah, and yes, it's very, very, very a different type of nerve-wracking. But yeah, so I think some of those aspects aren't really seen in movies. But yeah, it is a lot of going through documents and emailing and listening to meetings and going through meeting documents. And there are some like more fun, nuanced things like going into homeless encampments and talking with people. I just went up to High Desert Prison earlier this month and was able to interview people who were incarcerated about the heat that they're experiencing there. And so there are a lot of aspects about being a lot of quote unquote adventure aspects of like that you see in journalism movies, but not as sexy as some movies make it look like.
You know, I think back to when I was young, and I think I always wanted to be a journalist, like always. Like I remember I created a magazine in like the 3rd grade, and I remember it so vividly that I cut out the pages and I drew the pictures and I put little like yarn or something to bind it or what have you. And I wrote little articles about the People Mover, which is an elevated sort of train system that was being built in Detroit at the time. This was the 80s. And so I wrote about that, and I wrote about, I don't know what else. And it was just like I don't even think it was like a project or anything for school. I think I just did it. Like I always knew. And I thought I was going to be a broadcast journalist, which I also like, I don't like public speaking. I don't know if I do it well or not. Some people have said I do it really well. And I'm just like, is that what you heard? Because that felt like a train wreck to me the whole time. But I knew I like listening to people. It's one of the reasons I have this podcast, and I wanted to do really long conversations with people and just talk, because I was really getting tired of seeing sound bites of things, and even interviews that I click on and I'm like, oh, and it's on like CBS Sunday Morning or something. They're still not that long. They're still maybe 10, 12 minutes. And I know that they talk to them longer, but you know, they have to edit it down for time for television. And I can understand that. But I don't feel like I got anything like out of it. I want to know who people are. I want to know who they are. And so I was trying to figure out a way to marry my love of activism and policy and nerdiness and with my love of journalism, because for the longest time, I just stopped calling myself a journalist. I'm like, I haven't written anything and I don't know how long. And then I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm still a journalist. I'm just going to have to figure this out in a different way. And so voila, here we come with a podcast. But to that point, I think that I feel like everybody should have to go to journalism school or at least have to do a year of it, the same way I think everyone should be a waiter or a waitress, because I think it does something for you understanding how to deal with people, and then also how sucky people can be on the other side of a table when you're waiting.
I've been both.
See? And see, this is probably why I like you, because you understand like the bigger picture of things. But being a journalist goes back to that point of you talking about how words matter and how you say something and in the order that you say them in, all of that. And I'm not even talking about the Queen's English so much, because I don't really speak that. And I use slang, and I also code switch and whatever. And I'm also from Detroit. So there's a lot of that happening. But I know when I'm writing something or if I'm asking somebody something, how to be very specific so that I'm getting what it is that I need. And I'm saying like, this is what I'm asking for and not something else. Or when someone's talking to me and I'm saying, that's not what you said to me. And then you're being too nitpicky. No, actually, you need to say what you mean what you say.
Oh, no, I completely agree. And how I approach an interview with a elected official is way different than how I approach an interview with someone that's going through the eviction process. And because I don't deserve an interview. They don't owe me anything. Those people, elected officials, you're elected for a reason. So like,
y'all owe me a lot. We sit down and we don't talk.
Like accountability is a part of the job description. If you can't handle that, like, I'm sorry. Like I'm obviously nice and always nice, but the way I approach an interview or approach a question varies differently just depending on the person, because the language does matter.
It very much does. So what would you say is your hardest interview that you've ever done? And hard could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It could be a hard nut to crack. Like they're answering you yes and no answers.
One of the hardest ones that immediately comes to mind is when I was freelancing. It was during the 1 October mass shooting, and I was asked to be a stringer for the Washington Post. And so I had to go down on the strip to Mandalay Bay, literally hours after this happened, and go up and talk to people. Some were like sobbing and bawling their eyes out, and just having to break in and be like, I'm so sorry to do this, but can I ask you some questions? And obviously a lot of people said no, but a lot of people said yes. But that was really hard to ask someone very detailed questions and about something that literally just happened a few hours ago. That's probably the most traumatic moment of their life at that moment. God forbid they don't live through another mass shooting, but fortunately that some of those people actually have lived through multiple mass shootings. But that's the thing that comes to mind first, of just having to, and that happens a lot. I was at a journalism conference last year, and they were talking about interviewing hurricane victims, and one of the reporters said she didn't know if she could do this to her editor, and her editor said you shouldn't deprive someone with the opportunity to tell their story. And it's something that I wish that I would have thought about or heard earlier on in my career, because it's something that I've kept with me over the last year in particular since I heard it. I'm asking people in really hard circumstances. In the last year, since that seminar that I took, I have interviewed people going through eviction. I interviewed a man whose sister died while unhoused in like 100+ degree weather. I've interviewed people that are sleeping in their cars. Like I've interviewed people at very hard moments of their lives, and I'm always grateful for them being willing to talk with me, but I always approach this knowing like this is hard for me to ask this question, but I'm not going to deprive them of wanting their own autonomy to tell their story. So
I think that is a really good point. And I remember having to cover a funeral, and it was a funeral for a little girl that was murdered in Las Vegas, and then her body was found. And I can't remember the details. I remember I think her father's girlfriend did it, murdered her. And I went to the funeral, and it was a beautiful service. And I'm sitting in the back, and I'm starting to cry. And I'm like, I've got to hold it together, because it's not about me. And that's what I had to keep remembering. This is not about me. This is not about me. this is about the family, and this is about the little girl, and it's about justice, and being able to cover that event, because they wanted people there to see and to know, because they also wanted justice for the little girl. And because I want to say she might have been 8 or somewhere around there. And I just remember thinking, this sucks. Like, this is not what I ever thought about doing, this part of it. But it was also probably one of the most memorable things. And then I feel like I ran into one of the parents like years and years later, and she remembered me being there. And so those are the things that I think matter to people. And I think it is that opportunity to let people be able to tell their stories. But that's the part I think certainly in movies that they don't see, and they don't give people credit for. And what I would always want people to know is that people might complain and say, this is not being covered, that's not being covered. But also when you want something covered, that, understand that it's also hard for the person to be there and to be asking the questions of, how do you feel when something like that is happening around you?
That's why when people ask me about what I think about AI in journalism, which I know is going to be to journalism, it already is in some aspects, but
it makes me so mad.
I ever have the emotional intelligence or even the capability to do some of those interviews, to go into encampments and talk to people that are living physically on the streets, to have the emotional intelligence to talk to someone who is just lived through a mass shooting? AI, there's so many aspects of AI and so many aspects of journalism that AI will never, ever, ever be able to touch. And so I think there's always going to be, maybe journalism is ever evolving, but there's always going to be a need for storytelling to actually humanize just the policies that we're seeing and the events that we're living through.
AI can't give any tone and texture to the human experience. And like, I could have a whole separate podcast on AI and how angry it makes me when people are like, look, I just typed these few words in and look, this whole thing came out. And I'm like, that's nice. Look at you.
Yeah.
And by the time they're done doing that, I'm like, I actually could have just written this. And they're like, oh, that's different. I'm like, no, you could have just wrote this out. It's fine. It bothers me so much. But thinking about the stuff you write about, which a lot of it is about policy and politics. Now, I'll ask you, was that on purpose, the soiree into politics and then the political world? Or because, I mean, it is a part of making a difference, but it's also a glutton for punishment a little bit. What made you want to focus on politics?
So while I was doing freelancing, I was writing a lot of different stories because I was trying to get paid and survive and pay rent. And some of it had to do with policy issues and just how people's lives intersect with policy. And that's at that time, Nevada Current, where I currently work, was in the process of launching. We're part of a network called States Newsroom. That's a network of nonprofits that are launched throughout the country to fill news deserts and provide more coverage of politics. And so during that time, they're hiring or launching in Nevada, and I was asked to join. And so a lot of it was kind of a crash course in covering politics, but it was all things that I knew how to do. I think journalists, which kind of goes back to this, why I hate so many editors saying you don't have the background or talent or resume to do all these things. Like, that's what journalism is supposed to be about. We're supposed to be able to drop into any situation and kind of digest what we're seeing and explain it. And so some degrees, like, you do need more background and training, but that's the basic principles. Like, we're all should be able to do this. So I dropped into the world of politics, a lot of local policy, a lot of states policy, a lot of federal and how that influences state policy. And so kind of a crash course in a whole different, there was a lot of plate spinning and a lot of juggling, because sometimes it was city and local government, sometimes it was state legislators. But I found my way through it, and I don't like politics, but I love policy because we live and die by policy. Politics is like the behind the scenes meetings of how we get there and the people running to get there. But policy and policy coverage, that's like what makes and breaks society, and like how that's what we live by. And so I love covering that. And throughout that, I've developed a passion for reporting on housing policy and housing stability and homeless policy and how those policies play a role in people's lives and how they're able to keep afloat and how they are able to survive and navigate our society and navigate being a human and living their lives. But yeah, it was on accident and deliberate that ends up in this world. Like, I wanted a job. I wanted a next step. This is opening. I've always wanted to cover like social services and human rights issues, but that intersection is through policy. Some of the most horrid, all of the most horrid things that we've seen in human history has been a policy issue. Jim Crow was policy. Like, these are policy decisions that were made to restrict the movement of Black people throughout the South. That's all policy. Homelessness, these are policy decisions of how we treat our social safety net, the funding that we give to housing agencies at the federal and local level. Like, these are policy decisions. So everything that I wanted to do kind of wrapped around policy and politics. So I had to kind of learn both roles at the exact same time.
Yeah, I think even thinking about the homeless ban, the public camping ordinance in the city of Las Vegas, and when that was released and just how much of an uproar people were in, because yes, I understand that no one wants to see someone sleeping on the sidewalk. However, where are they supposed to sleep?
Yeah.
And that conversation, that makes me think about another book, actually. Have you had an opportunity to read The Meth Lunches?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Kim Foster, who was my neighbor, has a really great book that also everyone should read. And I'm still trying to get her on the podcast as well to talk about it. But she does a really good job in talking about homelessness and then the meth epidemic that seems to plague Las Vegas. And I go a lot of places. I'm always on the road. And obviously there's homelessness everywhere. But it feels different to me in Las Vegas. And I don't know if it's because it's 110 degrees outside and someone is laying on the sidewalk and they could be dead or alive and you don't know. Like, there's many times that I had called the police because I think someone is dead on the sidewalk. And it turns out they're not. They're just asleep, but they're in such a sleep because more than likely it's because of the drugs that they are on. Yeah. And just them having to disassociate probably from where they are, but they are like dead to the world for sure. And to sleep on that sidewalk, that I can't even imagine what that feels like. I don't even want to touch the sidewalk when it's been over 100 degrees every single day.
Yeah. And all, again, policy issues of I've talked to so many social providers and caseworkers talking about, it's kind of the chicken and egg of like what happened with addiction first, but a lot of people enter homelessness and then the addiction becomes a self-medication. And the reason why
you have to numb yourself.
Yeah. And the reason that happens is because the immediate solution of preventative care, whether it's rental assistance or better eviction and tenant laws, weren't there to prevent the homelessness. Neither was a strong social safety net and mental health services. Those weren't there on the front end to prevent homelessness. And so now that their addiction is setting in as like a self-medication, and the services on the back end aren't there either. There's not enough housing to place someone as they're doing detox or as they're doing mental health services, and as they're even just trying to escape homelessness, if they're just living in their car or living on the streets without substances. Like, there's nothing in the back end. So these all fold into the policy issues that we're seeing and policy deficits. Poverty is a choice. It's a policy choice.
It is. It is. I've always said that our master plan communities, Summerlin and McDonald Ranch, all those places that are master plan communities, it's on purpose that they have built the golf courses and the lovely parks and all of that around there. And you have great restaurants and grocery stores, but also the east side and the historic west side, all of those places are also master planned. It is on purpose that you will find so many fast food restaurants and back to back next to a check cashing place, next to, and then there's a dialysis location right there next to all of that. And it has been purposely built that way. And I feel like that's a policy that I've been trying to figure out as Make It Work Nevada, what we can do about, like, how can we restrict there being so many liquor stores in environments where people need less liquor stores and they need real banks and they need real grocery stores that offer fresh fruits and vegetables, and that there's adequate transportation, that sort of thing, so that people have an opportunity to have the resources that they need, because that is reproductive justice. And I think I'm always saying it and always trying to get people to understand like what reproductive justice is, because we are a reproductive justice organization. And that means more than just childbirth. That means the ability to live and to have resources so that you can raise a family in a environment that's not a desert, not a food desert.
Yeah.
And not a literary desert and not an educational desert. And so it's difficult because I feel like it's such an uphill battle. I mean, I think that gets to the point of hating politics, because I have been in rooms lobbying for paid sick days and childcare and things like that, but specifically paid sick days. We asked for 10 paid sick days, earned paid sick days for folks who are working full time. And we had people on, using air quotes, the other side, which are, I'll call them out, the chambers of commerce and what have you, that will say, oh, well, we can't give people 10 paid sick days because they'll use them all. And I'm like, well, people need to be able to stay home and take care of themselves. And, oh, but it's a burden on businesses. But also sick people are a burden on businesses. Sick people are a burden on infrastructure. And so if you can't sit down and take care of yourself, then that can lead to something else happening. That leads to a domino effect. It leads to pandemics because people can't stay home, and people kept going places because they had no choice. And then things just sort of, ripple effect out. And I think if we actually took the time to think about as humans what we need, not as workers, because we're not workers first. So that's my soapbox.
No, it's true. It's true. Like the politics of it all is like you see a policy solution of like that could have impact on so many of the issues and ills that we see. The policy solution would be providing sick leave, which one of the few countries that does not. But the politics of it all is how can we compromise to not piss everyone off, or to keep donors, or to keep our jobs and win other elections with enough support. And so that's why I hate the politics of everything, because it plays more important than the policy.
Yeah, it plays more important the self-centeredness of how is this going to affect me negatively, instead of thinking about the greater good of the community.
Yeah.
So thinking of the greater good of the community, we are headed into the election of our lives. As we say, every election cycle, but this one actually might be pretty unprecedented. And I saw somewhere on the interwebs, they were saying, I'm really tired of this unprecedented. I'd really just like some precedented stuff to happen. There's too much unprecedented things happening. But here we are. And these things keep seeming to happen on the weekends, from the attempted assassination of Trump and then what are we calling it with Biden? We're just saying that he is stepping down from the campaign trail of running for re-election. And that also broke on a Sunday. Yep. And, something about that Sunday news cycle where if, you can obviously, as a journalist, I know it's on purpose, not the assassination attempt. I don't know. I don't think old boy was thinking about this as a weekend cycle, but certainly for the Biden administration, whoever their comms people are, that they're like, okay, we're going to do this on a Sunday afternoon. That's when we're going to break this. So, and we're just going to send this out real easy and then have our ducks lined up in a row. And it was really seamlessly executed of them saying, he's not going to run. And then 30 minutes later, but Kamala is, and we're behind her. And then here you come with Bill and Hillary saying, we support Kamala. So I think about the back end of it, of everybody on the phone. Okay, so we're getting ready to do this. I need your statement. Is your statement ready? Is your statement ready? Because we're all ready. We're getting ready to do this thing, because they knew what was going to happen. But on this side of it, it's like, oh my goodness, what's happening? Like, this actually hasn't happened in this way before. So tell me what you were doing, what you're thinking about. Like, what do you think about, the state of our presidential election of 2024?
Too much. Let's stop this all. I need to promote to pause this. It's funny, going back to the Sunday afternoon comment. I believe it was Wolf Blitzer he posted like a photo of him at brunch earlier in the day, and then you see several hours later him on the air because everyone had to essentially cancel their brunch plans to cover Biden.
Everybody might have been a little bit tipsy with a little mimosa.
Thankfully, someone else was covering the news drop because I was definitely drinking espresso martini at brunch whenever that news happened. Actually, the person I was with, she was like, remember this moment that we're sipping espresso martinis while we have this news? But it is unprecedented. Like, I hate saying that, but like it is like, it's so, this the news cycle that we've had since really 2016, but for the purpose of this talk, since June 28th, since the debates, since Biden walked on stage as the plan of what he wanted to do and had a terrible, terrible, no good night where he just rambled and Trump lied, but the rambling became the story, even though like Trump lied like a lot. And so ever since that moment, like the news cycle has just been a different type of intense. Like it's been, like I said, very intense since 2016, since 2020, but it's just been a different type of intense where we've had the debates, the fallout from the debates, all this infighting in the party, within the Democratic Party, George Clooney weighing in for some reason. Then we get to the assassination attempts, and then we get to Biden visiting Vegas, and like you think maybe he'll turn this around because he just had this presser where he was very lively and answering questions, even though he did call Vice President Harris, Vice President Trump. Other than that, he like was very lively talking about foreign policy in a way that most people don't understand it. But then he comes to Vegas and he gets COVID, and then all of a sudden he's out. And so a lot.
I'm like, did he get COVID? Well, when they first said it, I was like, oh, so you just go hanging around, Vegas and touching everybody, and all of a sudden you got COVID. Thanks, Joe. I'm like, goodness gracious. But I honestly I'm full of conspiracy theories because I enjoy them. You enjoy slasher movies. I enjoy conspiracy theories. And I wondered, I'm like, did he have COVID, or was that like, okay, we need to take a break. We need a pause. So let's take a pause, because as soon as they said he had COVID, I was like, oh, he's not coming back into the race. I said that because like that was his moment to take a beat, because people were like, you need to come sit down because we need to have a talk. We need to sit down. And so whoever
he did say literally a day before that, he was like, I will get out of the race if God Almighty tells me, or if I have a medical issue come up, and the medical issue, and we're like, oh,
right. Okay. Because when they said COVID, they said he didn't have a fever or anything like that. And I'm like, so many people like COVID's back on the uptick. I have heard at least, half a dozen people in my circle have had COVID in the past, probably month and a half or so. And knock on wood, I've yet to ever get COVID, but I'm going to keep knocking on wood. So hopefully that's my cure or my, me keeping from getting COVID. But, it wasn't something that made it sound like it was detrimental. Like, oh, okay, he has COVID. Okay, he takes his medicine or whatever. And I know he is older. I know they make a big deal about his age, but also, it's different when you are of a certain age that COVID can handle, can look different for you. But to me, it felt more like, okay, this was just somebody pulled his coattail and been like, it's just not working. Like you are tired. And I wonder about that piece for politics specifically, why everybody has to be so much older. Why is that like the only occupation where people in their late 70s and 80s are vying for full-time employment to do over full-time jobs? Like, you're not working 25, 30, 40 hours a week. Like, to be the president, I can't even imagine how much time you're actually working, or in Congress, any of it. But they all hold on so tightly. And I get it. You work really hard to get there. And someone mentioned to me also that, Biden had run for various things for so long, like since 1979 or 1980, somewhere in there, and then it wasn't the first time he wanted to be the president. So he finally gets in there. He's like, no, I want my 2 terms. I want all 8 years. So I feel like they were prying it out of his hands. They could say that he just stepped down because it was for the greater good, but I think somebody made him sit down.
There is a lot of talk about Nancy Pelosi, which is funny because she's also
not young.
But it is true. And that we see so many older politicians not stepping out of the way for the younger class. I will say that's also a little bit, not to that extent, but there's some of that in the newsrooms too, where I see still older people with great wisdom, but they're still leading a charge and not making way for younger generations. And part of me wonders if it's these 2 things. If it's, one, a commitment to people and what you want to do, but also a little bit of hubris saying, I'm the only one that can do this. And we did hear President Biden say that multiple times. I'm the only one that can beat Trump because I'm the only one who has beaten Trump. And so I think both were at play with that. But yeah, there are a lot of older politicians that it's time to make way for a new generation. There are a lot of great voices that have, throughout society, throughout media, throughout the political field, that have done such great things, but it's time to make way for younger voices because we do need change. The world is changing around us. We can't do everything how it's always been. We need a new way forward. And so we need new voices. And so I'm glad that whatever made him step aside, that he did, in that it has been fascinating watching these last 48 hours and just the energy that has surged out of Harris presumptively securing the nomination, supposedly has all the delegates. We'll see when that happens. But the fundraising that's happened for her, the surge in volunteers, like the different groups that have hold these 40 and 50,000 plus phone calls and Zoom calls for her. It's been fascinating watching this surge that has happened. Once, whether he did it on his own or did it through force, once he stepped out of the way, watching this all transpire and watching the Trump campaign react too, and sheer panic, nothing but sheer panic.
I feel like he, with him stepping aside, that there was just like an instant like injection of enthusiasm, because I think so many people were like, yeah, Joe Biden, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden because I need to vote for Joe Biden, to, oh my goodness, like we can do something else. Oh, we can actually like step into this race. And I think it says a lot about how I think a lot of folks were either being loyalist or just like, I'm gonna stay home or whatever. I'm still concerned with the number of people who might try to stay home and not vote. But I think that, the last 48 hours, I was on that call, the Black lady Zoom call with 44,000 other women. And when I joined the call, there were probably 8,000 already on. And then it just kept growing and growing and growing. And to me, it's like, that's the magic of spreading the word for people to be a part of something. And people were excited. People were like crazy excited to be able to listen into that space. I had people texting me, did you know about this call? Are you on this call? And I'm like, yep, I'm on the call. And then they did the same thing, I think, with Black men. They just did one. And I heard they had also a very large number of Black men on that call.
And they're organizing one with white women right now, is what I saw on the interwebs. And so we'll see what transpires from that too. But the excitement, and I will say on top of like concerns around his age and if he's mentally there to not even just lead, but also because we could see through his presser that he understands foreign policy still. But if he had the stamina to actually do the campaigning part and really challenge Trump on his lies, that was called into question. But I think it's also that was circling a lot of people's minds of whether he was the right candidate. But Gaza and his actions in Gaza have also played heavily into the election, and just that enthusiasm and the lack of enthusiasm and the high number.
Young people are mad.
Yes.
Young people especially are mad about Gaza, and they have, they have zero chill on it. They're not into this picking the lesser of two evils, or we just got to go along to get along. I've talked to my children and some others, and they're just like, this is a hard no for me. This is a hard no. And I was, and still am, concerned because it's a Biden-Harris administration. So then they need to understand where Harris stands on these things and how she's going to show up for folks in that way. And so, but that was, I think, it's a really hard sticking point. There's so many people who just didn't even bother to be bothered with the primaries because they were like, we're undecided. That's also a very large movement of people moving away from being either Democrat or Republican.
Mm-hmm. I do think, even though as Biden-Harris administration, she does have an opportunity to distance herself a little bit because you do serve at the pleasure of the presidency when you still are the vice president. And even some early reporting has shown her having a different mindset when it comes to Gaza and seeing the mass atrocity and wanting to do more. And so there are signals that she could do more. And I'm really curious how that manifests in the next few weeks. It does have to manifest in the next few weeks in her campaign if she's going to get some of those uncommitted voters off the couch that were very discontent and just bothered by Biden's willingness to watch children just be bombed to death. So I'm really curious to see. We see this injection of energy in her campaign already, but I wonder what that looks like once she starts talking about the future of Gaza and how she's going to address that atrocity.
I think we have to wonder how long it's going to last because as generation, and by generation, I mean all of us that are living in this world right now, I feel like our attention spans have gotten a lot shorter.
Yeah.
And we require a lot more entertainment in order to stay engaged.
Yeah.
And right now it's there. People are excited. People are like, wow, what's getting ready to happen? They're going to be excited up until the convention. Will she get all the delegates? Who's she going to choose for her VP? Like that sort of thing. But once that part is done, and then we're just out here, asking people for money, and then people are getting all their phone calls and text messages, and the mailers are going to start coming. I feel like it's going to dip some. And so wondering how we keep that momentum, so that momentum rides all the way through to the polls, so that there is a real opportunity to not just elect the first Black and Asian woman as president of the United States, but also to engage people who were going to stay home and give them hope that things could be different, so that after the election, we can keep them engaged, to keep advocating for the things that they feel like they need in order to live their best life.
Part of it has to come down to giving a vision. Like, yes, we are stopping a dictator in Donald Trump, but we have to do more than just that. We have a severe climate crisis where heat is getting hot. It's getting hotter out here, and the heat is killing us. Sea levels are rising. We have a climate crisis we have to address. There are underlying issues of economic injustices that never been addressed, from lack of paid sick leave to lack of housing. I think the way that you keep energy high is not just comparing yourself to Donald Trump, but giving a vision, a concrete vision of where we're going next as an American society. And the fact that once we had a chance we were so close to passing progressive legislation on paid leave and housing until 50 Republicans and Joe Manchin blocked it. But recapturing that vision of like, these are the things that we can do that are going to benefit our society and make us better. So we're not just preventing a dictator from reassuming office with a scarier plan and more prepared. We're also having a vision. And so if she can capitalize that and be on the campaign all the time to show that vision, I think that will keep the momentum going between the time that the convention ends in late August to the time early voting starts in early October.
Yeah, I hope she can also show herself.
Yeah.
Because there are, what I'm seeing online, and I realize that we're all in our own little bubbles, right? There's your friend list, my friend list, and then whatever the algorithm gives us only, stretches so far. But I know I'm seeing people who are doubting. They're like, well, what has she even done? She hasn't done anything. And I think it looks that way to a lot of people because that's the way that it's been. The communications with the vice president's staff and her office has laid pretty low, but also we don't necessarily know the reasons why. Is it that way because they're just getting down to business and things are actually happening? Or is it because that's just how her and Joe Biden sort of, have agreed to, let things flow? Regardless, it doesn't help her. For people not to know who she is, to not know that she's a human being, because people are fascinated with celebrity. And ultimately, that's what the president and the vice president is. They're celebrities as well. If you go back to Bill Clinton, people fell in love with Bill Clinton because he was on the Arsenio Hall show.
With his saxophone.
With his saxophone. Right. Exactly. Why we were so obsessed with Bill Clinton and his private life and what he did. But he's also very charismatic. So if you've ever met him in person, you realize, like, when I met him in person, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, he really does talk to you like you are the only person in the room. And I'm just like, well, dang, Bill, hey, dang, Monica didn't have a chance. But I'm like, but that's not the presidency. Right. Yeah. That's not being able to play the saxophone is great. Kamala being able to cook a dinner and all of that. That's great. And we've seen her do some of these things online. But for whatever reason, that's what people really, they want to feel like they can have a beer with her. All of that. And
why? Like, I
don't know, because you're not going to have a beer with her.
I don't care if I have to have a beer. I don't drink beer, but if I have to go to tequila or wine, I have friends for that. I want someone that understands the policies that we need to govern this country and the policies that we need to make sure that we're connecting with other foreign powers and make sure that this world's not descending in darkness and that we're uplifting the lives. Like, that's who I want. I want the most capable person. I don't care if I can go drinking with them. Like
I don't go out drinking with my dentist.
Yeah.
But, well, do you understand how to clean my teeth? Can you read these x-rays? But we don't have to go hang out. Yeah, there's something with that. But for whatever reason, it does feel that it's very important for people to, one, know what she's done, and they have to be things that people care about. And then also that she's very personable or what have you. So I don't know how we get over some of these humps when it comes to personality and all of that, but they said the same thing about Hillary. And I think for me, I have been thinking about this a lot the last couple of days since the news broke, is that I think even myself, I'm going to have to put on a harder shell to even be able to stomach what people are going to say or have started saying about her, because people are mean anyway. Like, it's just, especially online, people become the keyboard thugs and all of that. And they will say things that they may not say in person. And they can talk really bad about folks. And I've seen it firsthand. Hell, I've had it happen to me firsthand. But the things that they're going to say, and they've already said about Kamala, it's going to affect especially me as a Black woman and other Black women that I know, because we're always questioned about anything and everything. You're just not qualified to do anything. I saw somebody post, she's the least qualified person in the world to be president. And I'm like, say what? But yeah, but hello, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And hello to a lot of other people that have ran on these tickets. But I feel as though people feel like they can be even nastier to women. Yeah. They were nasty to Hillary Clinton. She wasn't my favorite person either. But there is no reason for the amount of vitriol that people seem to spew about women running for office.
I remember, too, after the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, freaking Chuck Todd, the first thing out of his mouth was she overprepared? So there's no winning ever.
And does she read too much?
Yeah. And you're starting to see that already with VP Harris. And this is the DEI candidate, which saying DEI with a hard ER, essentially. But yeah, it's gotta get, it's already been super nasty. Some of the responses, which is so ridiculous because I'm sorry, she's like highly educated, has a law degree, has been in public office for a while. Before she was senator she's got 4 years of her 6-year term before she became vice president. She was attorney general of the largest state of California. Oh my gosh. And then she was the district attorney. Like, she has all these qualifications. And so for someone, especially like JD Vance, the venture capitalist, saying you're not qualified.
Did you read his book?
I did not read his book, and I'm glad I never got on that bandwagon.
I did read it. I read it. I read it when it came out, and it wasn't awful. It wasn't awfully written, I should say. And I'm glad I read it. I'm wondering if I even still have it. But you know, it gave me some insight into I think how a certain segment of Americans, a certain segment of white Americans feel about themselves and their plight through, you know, and what to them feels like an unjust economy and what have you, and all of that. But honestly, I feel like he didn't speak well to his background, his Appalachian background. It's almost like he turned his nose down to them as well. So, and I don't know if any of those folks have read his book to like understand that, you know, I don't know that he's really for y'all either, for real. But, you know, calling it hillbilly elegy makes it sound like it might be, like he might be, and he's not afraid to have called himself a hillbilly, that sort of thing. And, you know, there's some pride in it or whatever. But that's the difference between reading the headlines and never clicking on the link and reading the actual story. And then people make assumptions about what somebody said or did, knowing that a bunch of people aren't going to read. And I think he's hinging on the fact that people aren't necessarily going to read or research into things he said in the past.
This is why I'm glad that people have brought that back up. Even though I don't think I'm going to read it. We'll see what happens between now and...
There's the movie too, but I never watched the movie.
Poor Amy Adams, you deserve better.
And Glenn Close.
But the people talking about this isn't my life in Appalachia, and 2, you're actually not from Appalachia. Like, you are like Appalachia adjacent, but also brings to this broader point of the weaponization of success stories that I often see of, if I can make it, anyone can make it kind of things. And we weaponize that a little bit, and like we put people on platforms and pedestals once they quote unquote do make it out of these situations and make a name for themselves. But then we never address these, again, policy issues. It all comes back to policy, but we weaponize these success stories as a way to push back against and fight against policy changes. And he's frustrating. Like, to come from that and then turn around and be who you are now is just kind of gross.
And that seems to be a thing with politics too, that I noticed that it feels as though if someone's introducing themselves, they always have to start with a sob story. You know, my mama worked 2 jobs and my father was gone, or my daddy worked 3 jobs and the dog only had 2 legs. And, you know, all these things happened to me. So I understand what it means to be a Nevadan, an American, or, you know, a Wisconsin, or whatever it is that people say. In order to, I'm one of you. I understand struggle. So now I'm going to represent you. But when you actually work on your policies, you're not working on policies to make it so people don't need 2 jobs, or that they can find prosthetic legs for their dog that doesn't have enough limbs. Whatever it is, they're not actually deep diving into these things and getting to the roots of problems, because a lot of times it feels like with politicians, they're just constantly campaigning. So even when they're done campaigning and they win, then they're back campaigning again to say that they won and they're trying to do something, but they never actually just get the space to just sit down and do it. And that's the part of politics that I think that's really frustrating.
I think AOC said this at one point and I love it, that your job is not to get reelected. Your job is to, once you have power, put that power to use and look at the policy solutions that are affecting the lives of your constituents and the people around you, which is also my gripe with a lot of Nevada legislators, and that gripe I've heard often before from organizers that I interview and people on the ground that I interview here in the state, the fact that there were a Democratic trifecta for multiple sessions and what they did with their power. And it was always like, oh, we'll do it this next time around, or this other time around, or there's COVID, so we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. But that goes to a lot of politicians outside of Nevada. It's like not using your power to actually make a difference in the moment that you have it. And it's always kind of looking ahead for the next campaign season or next job opportunity or next office.
How do we fix that? How do we fix that?
Getting money out of politics, putting very serious restrictions on the type of money that we put on politics. I think in Nevada, that also means like creating a full-time legislator. But
say that one more time. A full-time legislative body that also has staff.
Yes. And so they don't have to worry about campaign donations. They can just focus on the work. But in general, it's kind of getting campaign donations out of politics. I think that's one way we look at this. A lot more transparency in the donors and donations that we get. A lot of legislation preventing the cross-pollination of you going from politics to lobbyists within a moment's notice. I think there are a lot of ways that we can standardize and legislate norms and these policies that kind of prevent influence into our policies. And so I think those are some of the things that come to top of mind. But yeah, definitely campaign finance reform is one of the top things.
You probably going to hear on the recording, that was the clicking of my keyboard. While you were talking, I'm like, I need to look up and see how much money Kamala has raised so far, because I know that she was like really pulling in them dollars. Yeah. And the top thing that came up was $100 million after Biden's exit. Now that's not including, I don't think, what Biden had already raised, which I think was like 90 something million, I think. But she's raised $100 million in it was 81 million in 24 hours, and just over that, $100 million. And you think about $100 million, like actual $100 million that is going to be used to put on some fancy commercials and to send out the mailers and to geotag our Instagram and our Facebook so we see all the ads, so that we get the emails, and we're going to get some buttons and some t-shirts and some swag and all of that, so that she can win $100 million. That's just this little chunk. That's not all of it, because obviously more money is going to be raised, and that's not including what Biden had raised. What we could do with $100 million.
I'm going to amend my answer a little bit of getting money out of campaign politics, funneling some of that money into local news, into news in general, and news nonprofits that are investigating.
Into local nonprofit organizations that are working on affordable childcare, equal pay, and paid family leave. But yeah.
In both, there's so much money to go around, but
I don't actually need $100 million. Probably, I'm sure I can deal with a little bit less. I'll figure out. We'll stretch it. We'll stretch 50 million.
But investing in like local news and news in general helps a lot with accountability issues. So when politics take preference over policy and people are catering to donors and catering to everything other than the constituents, you have enough news and reporters on the ground to investigate and hold them accountable and actually maybe prevent them from doing that. There's so many stories that I've started doing before that, like, when I send a question, the policy that I'm looking into kind of stops because there is some shame factors. Or you look at the reporting around ProPublica did around the Supreme Court, and now that might lead to maybe ethics rules. Like when you have people actually holding those in power accountable and having more and have a robust news outlet to be able to hold, that actually prevents a lot of these issues that we're seeing, and it prevents and makes sure and keeps politicians in line a little bit more. And so getting money out of politics and investing some of that money into the factor in the branch that is actually supposed to hold them accountable, which is the media.
It just shows how much money there is in the world. But there's never enough money to do the things that we say need to happen, like, curing homelessness. Yeah. How we could probably cure some diseases if we could invest this much money into the research that is necessary. Clark County School District could probably move up the ladder in whatever number it's at now, which is still probably in the high 40s, ranked across the country. That what this money do is an investment, paying off people's student loans or housing. I don't even want to say affordable housing, but free housing, so that everyone had a roof over their head and running water and electricity, basic needs.
A universal basic income, so people actually have like some help with like gaps in the money that they don't have, because you've seen those programs starting to crop up all over the country in certain cities, and they're really successful and really good at keeping people out of homelessness and out of poverty.
You think we'll get that in Las Vegas?
No, my God, no. I wish. I wish. We have the money to do that. Literally, we have the money. We have $1 billion resort in gaming industry. We have the money, if we so desired, to make them pay a better and fair share, to enact a universal basic income for our most vulnerable residents, which would actually help solve some of our homeless issues. But I don't know if I won't say no. I will say the road to get there would be very long and hard, and it would
winding and unpaved.
Yes.
It is very much unpaved. So let me ask you, what does democracy mean to you? What does democracy mean to you, and do you think we have it?
Oh. Our democracy, if we do have one, is extremely fragile at the moment. It's been fragile for quite some time, and it is uneven. Democracy means kind of this even footing for everyone to have a say in what we want to see in the direction of our country, and we have that, but we don't have it to the fullest extent that we could be. Actually, do we even have that? I don't know. I don't know, because it is uneven. Voters don't have the same say as corporations or powerful or donors. Donors had a lot of influence in getting President Biden out of this election, more so than uncommitted votes that were angry with the treatment of Gaza and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And I don't know, to be honest. I'd like to think that we have some, but we do have a democracy. But if we do, it is very uneven, and not everyone's voice is on the same footing. And there are a lot of powerful interests that get higher footing, and some classes of people that actually get better outcomes and better bang for their buck, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I ask most people this question on the podcast, and the answers vary so much, which says a lot about whether or not we actually have democracy.
What do you think?
Yeah, right. So, and so for me, I don't feel like we do, not in the true sense of the word, of that equity and that equal investment into our communities. There are too many have-nots and too many folks who are so disengaged, and not just because they want to be or because they've chosen to stay away, but because they don't have the access. When I read about people not even having access to the internet, it really blows my mind that, and people are trying to make that a public utility as well, that is included as a basic need, because at this point it's become that. And not having access to the resources that you need to just live every day, to just feel like you can breathe. To me, doesn't mean that we have a democracy. Everybody doesn't have to agree, but everybody should have access to, and we shouldn't keep creating more things that add more barriers to someone having access to even voice what it is that they need and want, and who they'd want to choose to lead them. And so we're so far from it because of exactly what you said. Corporations having so much power, people who have access to millions upon millions of dollars having so much more power. There's a certain cap of money that is just, y'all got enough money. I just feel like there is no need for, and this is no hate on sports players or celebrities or anything like that. I think people should get paid for their work. But when you have a basketball player or a football player and they have a $50 million contract or $100 million contract, and I don't know how much LeBron James makes, but it sounds like it's a lot of money. But why you need so much?
Yeah.
There's just a certain point where you are fine. There's your
Yep.
kids is fine, they kids gonna be fine, and their kids are gonna be fine too, because you have this money, you can invest it, you can make more money off of that money, and then you got endorsements on the side. That's only, we're just
Yeah.
talking about a salary here. When it's too much money, you can only eat, so you only got two hands and one mouth. There's only so much you can eat. There's only so big a house that you actually need. This overconsumption of life is just, it blows my mind. And especially when you see people roaming around Vegas that look so lost. And we know that these people at some point had parents who welcomed them into this world, that somebody swaddled them into a blanket and said something nice about them or loved them or held them or what have you. And now they're walking barefoot on 115-degree concrete and are so lost and so broken, and so many things are going on. Like, that juxtaposition is so big to me that I don't feel like that can't be a democracy.
Yeah.
Can't be. Well, on that note, here we are. Before we go, I want to ask you two more questions. One question is about the elections in Nevada specifically, because we haven't talked about what your thoughts on any of them, and your thoughts on the presidential election as well. Do you have any predictions on who's going to be our next president? And then any thoughts around the elections in Nevada? Anything that you've got your eye on that you're really interested in paying attention to?
To first question, I honestly do not know. And anyone who tells you that the polls are saying this and I know this is full of it, and mostly just trying to get their voice out there. And everything changes so quickly. Polls are so unreliable. The electorate that is voting is busy, and so doesn't have time to keep up everything, and because of that, they're forgetful of certain things. So everything changes on a dime. So I do not know where we're going with this election cycle. I would like to think that the surge that we saw with Harris is a good indicator of what could be, and I think she does have a chance to beat Donald Trump. But I don't know. There's no guarantees, and anyone that says anything differently is kidding themselves, and is I'd be very skeptical if anyone can say with any certainty. As far as in the state, I'm definitely keeping my eyes out on legislative races and to see if Democrats do pull out a supermajority. They're one seat shy in the Senate to getting a veto-proof majority, and so I'm really curious to how that shapes up, because that will have impact on a lot of legislation that comes down and affects the lives of Nevadans, and what type of housing policy we do, and what type of healthcare policy we do, and the criminal justice reforms and lack of reforms that we pursue. And so definitely be looking out on the legislative races. Legislature affects everyone's lives here in the state a lot, just as much as federal policy. So yeah, just definitely legislative races. I am curious how the congressional seats shake off, but they've been redistricted enough to give Democratic edge, and so I am curious if they're able to keep that. But they have that edge, and so it's their game to lose. But mostly just interested in the legislative races and where that goes.
Yeah, I think I'm most interested in school board. Like, I feel like the school board is really, there are a lot of seats up this time, and there's no elected Black school board trustee right now. And so there's an appointed, but not elected. And I really want that to change. Yeah. And I think there needs to be more representation of the Black community on our school board. So my last question is, I'm going to ask you to pick a number between 1 and 3,000. And this is how you get your last question from my book of 3,000 questions.
1 and 3,000. 77.
77. All right. Right here in the front. Okay. Do you have a special keychain? And if so, where did you get it?
I don't have a special keychain. I don't have a lot. I don't think I have any keychains because I have so many keys on my, because I have a bad habit of not taking it off old keys, and just kind of
So
keep
you just carry around keys. So you look like a janitor.
Yeah, it's not that bad, but I do have some keys on here. I'm like, I have not used this key in a minute. But yeah, I don't have any special keychains because I feel like keys are already so clunky enough. Not that I would be opposed to it. I think I do have like a, a house key that like if I'm going to walk up to like check the mail or walk up to like get a Starbucks, so I don't have to take like my big chunky key. But that doesn't have a keychain. That just has like a clip, like so I can clip it to a belt. But I never use the clip. But I love playing with the clip. Like it's weird. Like so, I guess that is a keychain, and so because I like playing with that little clicker, and I do when I'm walking and holding it in my hand, like I'll click it quite often. So.
All right. Okay. Well, you got your clicker keychain and your beginner janitor key ring that you'll be working in. I actually don't even have that many keys. Like almost everything I have is digital now, like on purpose. So
That's nice.
I get what it is, but when I do need to carry keys, like our office needs a key, like I'm almost like, where's the keys? Because I'm never looking for the key. Because I'm like, oh, I can turn this off with my phone, or I can, it's got a punch code or whatever. And my car, like you can just walk up to it and it, opens for you sort of thing. So it keeps me from having to hold on to keys, which it's made me lazy. And then I lose keys more often now. Who knows? Anyway, Mr. Michael Lyle, thank you so much for spending time with me and talking about all the things politics. And I got to learn a little bit more about you too, which I'm really excited to have done. And is also the purpose of this podcast. So hopefully other folks have gotten to learn a little bit more about you. And I'm just grateful and thankful that you said yes to be on this week's episode. And I want people to know where to be able to find you and read your writing. So what is the best place for people to find you?
Yes. Thank you, one, for having me. And two, and if you would like to check out my work and the work of my colleagues that we're trying to do to write about all the things happening in the state and policy happening in the state, you can go to nevadacurrents.com. So it's Nevada spelled out currents.com. So all my writing's there, all the good work that we're doing is there. And then if you want to follow me on social media, you can go and find me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it.
I'm never not going to call it Twitter.
I still call it Twitter too. I'll never stop calling it Twitter. Elon. At MJ Lyle.
Oh, I forgot. That was actually a question I was going to ask you. Is there somebody you've not interviewed that you are dying to interview? Do you have like a dream interview, like bucket list or top person or a couple people? You said Elon Musk, and so I thought about it.
Yeah, I don't want Elon Musk. As far as like other like in the media, the first one that came to mind is Matthew Desmond, who's the author of Evicted and Poverty by America. I would love to interview him.
I love that book so much.
Yeah, he's so great. Isabel Wilkerson, maybe, who's the author of Cass and Warmth of Other Suns, which I'm reading right now. Ava DuVernay, I just saw her speak at a journalism conference, and she's just fantastic. And then I'll end on a fun one, which is Issa Rae, just because like I loved Insecure, and she just seems like a fun personality. And just
and she's a Capricorn, so I think
is she okay?
Yes, but it's so funny. I think we have the same list. I swear, I think we have the same list because I love Evicted. Evicted is one of my favorite books. I made my entire staff read it. And Isabel Wilkerson, because I'm also curious because I haven't seen her do any press around the movie Origin. Yeah. And I was really curious as to why, we had not seen her talk about the movie because it's so much about her life and it's so personal. It makes me wonder, like I got conspiracy theories. Like, did she not like the movie? That sort of thing. I'd love to talk to her. Issa Rae is just dope. I've followed her since Awkward Black Girl on YouTube. I was watching her way back when. And and then I think I want to talk to Tabitha Brown. These are all people I want to have on the podcast. And I think they would all be like really great. And Ava DuVernay, just because she is beautiful and graceful and so smart and just decided I want to make films. And then she did it. And that part is just like, she's the epitome of I was doing something else and I decided this is what I wanted to do. And I didn't go to film school, but I decided I could make films. And then she did it. So
Oh, also Michelle Butte, the
Oh,
comedian turned,
yes.
because she started in journalism and then turned into did comedy and she has stand-up comedy, but also has like her TV shows, and she's fantastic. And like every time I see her speak and like hear her talk, she's just a fun personality that I would love to.
Yeah, she's one of those people that look like they exude joy.
Yes, yes.
Like you see her, she walked to a room. It's like, oh, hey,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, so for real now, I'm gonna let you go. I was like, oh, I forgot to ask that. But that's how I interview people. I'm like, sorry, I'm like Columbo. Sorry, one more question. I got one more question. But again, I thank you and I appreciate you, and I hope to have you back again. Hopefully we can chat a little bit more about the election as we get closer to it, or maybe even right after it. And then certainly legislative session, because there's bound to be plenty of things to talk about. And I am trying to figure out the best way to help engage people a little bit more in the session, because Carson City and Las Vegas are extremely far away from each other. And I think people feel really disconnected to whatever's happening up north.
Absolutely. So, thank you for having me. I'll be back anytime.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun. I knew it would be fun, and I knew it would be long. So that's all right. That's all right.
Thanks for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington, with music, mixing, and editing by Black Gypsy LLC. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy.